Welcome to Ladies Talking Love and our first roundtable episode of season 2. In this episode, we talk about healing from sexual abuse. Usually talking about this topic, I feel so frustrated and sometimes just helpless with how often it can happen. But after this interview, I felt empowered by this strength of these women who shared some of their experiences of overcoming and working through the pain that their sexual abuse and traumas had caused them. Even though we don't talk about specifics of the abuse, we do talk about how they were able to recognize that what had happened was abuse. And we also talk about what triggers feel like for them and how they're able to work through it. I hope that this episode helps you feel empowered by the strength of women and empowered by the strength of women sharing their stories. Shannon and Leticia do a fantastic job giving hope to those who have suffered from abuse. And also, I think by sharing our stories, we can help prevent more abuse from occurring. After we finished the interview, Leticia sent me this text of the one thing she would add to our interview if she could. And I thought it was a perfect segue into this episode. She said, "If you are a survivor, this heartbreak has wired you certain ways, but I know from experience that it does not take away from joy, fulfillment, and beautiful connections. Don't feel like you are hard to love or frustrated that you have certain things to work through with intimacy. Everyone does. You are not alone in that. With time, healing, communication, and lots of love from yourself and others, you will find what you're looking for." It's Ladies Talking Love, a community of women uncovering more joy and fulfillment in sex as we learn from experts and amazing women like you. Together, let's create a world where women's sexuality is celebrated and understood, beginning with our own. I'm your host, Ariel Finlinson. Let's talk love. Before jumping in, I just wanted to thank you for being here. Thanks for learning with me and exploring these topics that are often taboo to talk about. Thank you so much. If this podcast has been meaningful or helpful for you, I would really appreciate if you could go and leave a review. That helps other people find the podcast and just know what it's all about. So without further ado, let's talk love. I am so excited to welcome Shannon and Leticia onto Ladies Talking Love today. Thanks so much for joining me, you guys.
Yeah, of course.
I will just go ahead and let you introduce yourself. Let's start with Shannon.
Okay, I'm Shannon. I've been married to my husband, Eric, for 9 years. We met at a hockey game where he left me a poem with his number on it. There's more to that story, but it was really cute. So I texted him. We have 3 kids, boy, girl, 8, 5, and 2. And I like exercising, baking, camping, and Harry Potter.
Good things.
Okay, well, I'm Leticia. My friends call me Lay. And I've been married for 9 years to my cute husband, Brett. We have 3 children. I love yoga, mindfulness, like growth work, and always a fun fact, I'm from Brazil.
That is awesome. Well, I better start calling you Lay then. I want to be your friend.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful to have you guys on. We're going to cover a topic that can be hard to kind of broach sometimes. We're going to be talking about sexual abuse and how these awesome ladies have kind of been able to work through their past experiences of sexual abuse to then create a healthy sexual relationship in their marriages now. And I always wish we didn't have to talk about this because I wish it wasn't a thing, but I'm so grateful that you guys are willing to come on and just share some of your experiences because I think so many women are struggling or have experienced sexual abuse, but they don't always know where to turn to have a support system. So I hope that what we talk about today will be helpful. So kind of just to get us started, I just wanted to know what it's been like after your previous experiences of sexual abuse in your life to then enter a marriage relationship and kind of start to build a trusting sexual relationship with your spouse. Because I think that could be a really hard journey after experiencing sexual abuse.
Well, for me, it was just a really slow process. I think when we first got married, I had kind of shoved it all down. I didn't really realize that I hadn't thought about it, hadn't dealt with it. And so things kind of started to come out slowly. And then I was being triggered, but I didn't even know that that was what was happening. And so it's just taken a long time, really. But it's good because I think without him, it would have taken longer, probably.
Yeah. How did you link that the triggers were coming from your past experience of sexual abuse?
Gosh, I don't even know where I began to make those connections. I think actually I would like go to certain places or hear certain songs. And I realized that those places and those songs, that sounds so strange. I knew that those triggers were related to those experiences. And then I think I started connecting that those feelings were the same as what was sometimes happening when we were trying to be intimate.
Mm.
So I just kind of slowly recognized those things and I would explain and he'd be like, oh, and it would make connections for him too. And then, yeah.
That's amazing that you were able to make that connection, because I think that's so powerful when we can finally realize like, oh, this is why I'm feeling this now, even though it's not necessarily from this moment, it's happening because of my past, and being able to link that.
Yeah.
What about you, Lay?
Mine's similar. I didn't disclose my abuse until I was 17. And I waited for my husband. He did a 2-year service mission for our church. And so when he came home, I had done a year of therapy and I was like, I'm healed, like we're good, And so I didn't think anything of it. Even like my therapist and my mom were like, so are you nervous for anything? Like trying to get it out of me because I did not share much. And I felt like I had a secret for so many years. And so it was like, what do you say? And what's appropriate to say? And like I was saying, my therapist and my mom, like, so how are you feeling? Trying to get at like things in the bedroom, like you're getting married. And I was like, we're fine. It really was fine. Like I felt all the hormones and you're so excited and you're so in love. And it wasn't until our honeymoon that it was like certain clothing or smells or even lights being off would trigger me. And I was like, oh yeah, we can't do that. And I would just brush it aside and move on, like just trying my very best to pretend I didn't have issues. Towards the beginning, I had some things that we had to deal with. And then it was like, oh, okay, once I don't have those things, we're good. And we were good until it hit me again. I feel like trauma does that. It comes in cycles. And when you're ready to deal with it, it comes up, even if you don't want to deal with it. And it came up for me after I had my daughter, the worst ever. I thought I had postpartum anxiety. I was just like a wreck all the time, anxiety all the time, triggers, but I didn't realize they were triggers. I was just like, I'm crazy, like just didn't know what was going on. And through self-help and a lot of time, I put pieces together and I was like, oh, I'm triggered by this. Just like Shannon said, you start connecting the dots and it's like, oh yeah, your past is coming to haunt you.
Can you explain a little bit about what it feels like when a trigger happens, maybe in your body, in your heart, your mind, to kind of help people understand what that feels like?
I feel like for me, I'm triggered a lot about by safety. If I feel unsafe, and for me now putting it all together, having a daughter was unsafe. Like she's not safe. All the bad things are going to happen to her. And I realized that's what I am triggered by, which explains so much of my life and my things. Like I do not watch scary movies. I'm not down for Halloween, like any of these things, like fear. I realized after therapy and after years of linking the dots, it was like, oh, if I feel unsafe, whatever it is that makes me feel unsafe, whether it's a scary movie or a man looks at me a certain way down the street or someone says something to threaten me, like if it threatens a relationship, even, I feel unsafe. My triggers turn into anxiety. I just get my heart racing. I can't think straight. My mind's racing. And I want to run away.
That's interesting. I feel like My triggers feel, I think my heart might race a little bit, but I sort of shut down. I think if there's fight, flight, or freeze, I'm freeze. I turn inward. I feel dark. That's one way I can describe it, is like things just feel dark and scared. And I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain, but just want to get away, but I'm stuck. That's kind of how it feels for me.
I love hearing both of your guys' perspectives because I think it probably feels different for a lot of people, but to kind of have an idea, you might be able to realize like, oh, that's maybe me feeling a trigger in an area of my life. Do you have a process now of kind of what you do when you are triggered? Have you figured something out with yourself or with your spouse, especially in the bedroom when triggers come up?
We've learned together what triggers me, and we avoid that. We avoid the things that trigger me, which I think is one way you can deal with it. Ideally, I would be able to work through the triggers, but the ones that I haven't been able to yet, we avoid those things. There are very specific things that are just off the table, and he's fine with that. I'm certainly fine with that. And then if I start to feel triggered, he catches on immediately. He can just tell, and we take a step back and we talk. And one thing that I don't know if this would work for everybody, and it sounds really silly, but I literally repeat in my mind, I am safe. I am safe. And that does kind of help me get through it. And sometimes there's no recovering the moment. You just kind of have to work through it for the time. And then you feel better and you get back to normal the next day or whenever you get a chance. But it's still a process, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I think what I'm learning is like, I'm learning to recognize my triggers, learning to work through some of them, and accepting that it's still going to be a process.
And when the triggers happen, especially if you're in an intimate moment with your husband, do you usually, for you, process that together? Or do you kind of just need to take a break and process it by yourself?
Initially, I try to keep it to myself because I often just don't want to bring him down, but he's really perceptive of my feelings, and I feel better after we talk about it. So really, it would be better if I just talked about it. But normally it takes me a moment, and
yeah,
that's okay too.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I agree. And just to add to Shannon, I also think for me, it's taken years to get to where I am now, where I can say, oh, I'm triggered. We need to do this, because it was years of my own figuring it out. And then as a couple figuring it out. When I am triggered in an intimate moment, it usually comes with that heart racing, or just my mind will race. I already know. And by this point in our marriage, I'm just like, okay, trigger. And usually, whether it's in an intimate moment or just normal daily life, mindfulness techniques really help me, like to just come back, ground myself to my body, because I feel like a lot of us, whether it's fight, flight, or freeze, we're trying to like leave our body, our experience, whatever it is. So it's just trying to come back to the present moment. And that's interesting that Shannon said that that's like her mantra, because I do the same.
Oh,
I am safe. I am safe. Or I am safe with Brett is another affirmation. And sex is good is another affirmation. That's usually what I try to do. And sometimes it ends the moment, like Shannon was saying, and sometimes we can go on. But also something that really helped me was when we were first married, I just, everyone in their sex life will not have a desire at some point because you're tired, or you did too much, or you just want to sleep, whatever it is. I used to think, oh, anytime like Brett wants to hug me or kiss me or just like cuddle me in bed, it's going to turn into sex. So like it's an immediate turn off for me. I even remember the moment because it seemed like so vulnerable at the time, but like I cried about it and I was like, I feel like every time it's going to lead to sex. And if I don't want to, then I'm going to pretend to fall asleep. Or, like, it's kind of embarrassing to say, but also I know I'm not alone, and it's not just.
You are definitely not alone in that.
Yeah.
And my husband just like held me, and he's like, no, affection is because I love you and I want to be with you. And it's not always for sex. And because of what I had experienced, it was like mind blown, like, whoa, okay.
Yes.
That makes sense. And so that is really huge for me, where I don't know if it's a mantra, but something that I have in my mind, like, this does not have to go anywhere. And I feel safe if it does or if it doesn't. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Totally.
She just reminded me of a moment. This blew my mind so much. I cried that night. So we were being intimate. And I think because of my abuse, I had this idea that sex meant orgasm. That was the end goal, was for someone to orgasm. And one day I said to Eric, I'm sorry, this is taking a long time. And he was like, why are you sorry? I'm having fun. I want this to go on. It completely like blew my mind. I just had never felt so loved. It completely changed my perspective about what our physical relationship was. It was a way of showing love to each other. And what I had learned from my abuse was that it was a means to an end.
Mm-hmm.
And I love my husband for teaching me that this is how he shows his love to me, and me, my love for him.
That's powerful. And I think even for women who may not have experienced abuse, I think that's a common belief that a lot of us have in both of these arenas. And I think it's so empowering. Like Lay was talking about, being able to ask. I think someone else actually on the podcast one time said, was like, I finally asked my husband, like, every time you touch me, do you want to just have sex with me? And he was like, no, I just want to hug you. But like, we kind of have this in our minds sometimes. And so I think that vulnerability is so beautiful. And thanks so much for sharing, Shannon, to your story. It's just so awesome when we can really see where our spouse is coming from. And I was curious if you guys can, I know it might be hard to kind of articulate, but what are some of the things maybe you discovered along the way, or that helped move you to keep working through the trauma?
My husband knew about my abuse before we were married. So it wasn't something we talked about, because it was like, this happened, that's it. Like, no, thank you. Like, I will not talk about this. I mean, I didn't say that. I was a clam, I didn't talk about it. I'm just a very deep thinker. I think a lot. And I think I processed a lot in the beginning just like that, because I didn't have triggers for the first few years, other than little things here and there. I didn't realize what they were, but I was always trying to piece it all together, because there's just a lot. I didn't tell a lot of people. So it was like, okay, so keep it hidden still. So don't tell anyone. You don't need any help. You're fine. So for a long time, it was just a lot of mind work. And then slowly, as I started seeking more help, I actually heard a woman's CD about her talking about her abuse and how she was healing and how empowered she felt. And I was like, oh, I've never talked to anyone about this. I didn't know that it was okay to talk about. I didn't know that people talked about it. I didn't know really what abuse was. It took me a lot of years to realize what happened to me was abuse. But after listening to her CD, she was an energy worker. I went to her because I was like, you can heal, like, whoop, and did some work there. And that helped me be able to talk to Brett. Like, being able to talk to someone helped me be like, oh, this is something that needs to be talked about and addressed. And not that it has to be every conversation, but it's important for you to understand, this is how I feel when this happens, or this is a trigger or an activation for me. And that's why I will stop talking, or I need to stop, or whatever it is.
What Leticia said about not realizing what happened to her was abuse, I think so many people can relate to that. You would think it'd be obvious, but when you're the one that's in it, like for me, I'm the one that showed up to this place or spent time with these people. So I just chalked it up to me being a dumb teenager. There are worse words that I used to describe myself, but I try not to do that anymore. But then over time, I would hear other people's stories. So it's kind of like Leigh said. I think if I hadn't heard other women talking about their abuse, I wouldn't have realized that's what happened to me. And that's why I feel this way and that way in certain places or whatever. And I think I just made connections by talking to other people over time, which is part of why I am talking to you now, is because I recognize the importance of talking about this. This sounds hilarious, but there's the tampon commercial where Amy Schumer says, if you don't talk about it, you don't learn about it. And it's so true. Like, if we don't talk about this, I may have never realized that I had been abused. Like I said before, I started slowly making connections. And then I had a friend, it was very eye-opening. She wrote a blog and she described some of these things and it like hit me like a ton of bricks. Oh my gosh, that's what happened to me. That's abuse. And she described this retreat through the Unique Foundation that Leigh and I have both been to. And that was really helpful too. They teach you techniques to deal with your triggers and everything. And you talk to other women who have been through abuse. And I think for me, that was a huge step forward in my healing journey, which it wasn't by myself, but it wasn't with my husband. It was like, I took the step to go to that place and it was scary, but it was so good. There is something so wonderful about talking to other people who've been through it that I think, like, if you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking about your abuse and you haven't shared it with anyone or it's hard for you, I would just encourage you to talk about it, because that is for me when I started taking steps forward.
If there are women maybe listening who are just realizing like, oh, I wonder if what I experienced was abuse. What were some of the things that helped you realize that was abuse? That was not okay.
For me, it was that I had been emotionally, sexually abused. So I did have a circumstance where it was, I guess you could call it sexual assault, because I had said no, right? But in other circumstances, they were boyfriends that were manipulating me with their words. And so I think that was so sneaky, I didn't realize. And when I heard her say, he would say certain things to make me think that I had to do it or yada, yada. That was a connection for me. I was like, I didn't want to. It didn't feel good. It should feel good. Your sexuality should be a positive experience. If it's making you feel dark inside, if it's making you question yourself, if it doesn't feel like it's going both ways, you're probably being abused.
Would you add anything, Leigh?
My experience was different. Mine was parent to child. And so I think for me, well, actually, it took when I disclosed, my church leader who I was coming to confess was like, and this is child abuse. And I just sat there and stared at him because I was like, what are you talking about? In my mind, I thought when I hear abuse, child abuse, I think someone is hitting you, hurting you, right? And so it was a cloudy thing for me because it was like, what do you mean? I don't get it. Because when you're a child, I think if blurred lines are all you've ever experienced, you don't understand. If you've never had someone teach you like, well, we don't let people touch us here, or this is not appropriate, or whatever it was. There was other circumstances and we don't need to go into it. But it was, for me, the biggest mind blown that I ever was when I had my own child and I looked at my perfect little baby and I was like, wow, how can someone be so weird to want to hurt a child? And that was the biggest like, oh, okay, yeah, it was abuse. I don't need to convince myself anymore,
Yeah. Thanks so much for sharing, you guys. And I'm so grateful you're opening up this really important conversation. And I hope that we can all do better to teach our kids about consent and about being in charge of their bodies, and that they get to make the choices of what's okay and what's not. And that it's never okay for someone to touch certain parts of their bodies, unless we're helping them wipe or clean their bodies, their parents or whoever is okay. But yeah, anytime you feel uncomfortable, that's a good sign that that's not okay, and to seek help.
I think it happens in marriage too, even in a healthy relationship. The difference is when you express the discomfort and they stop, or you express the discomfort and they're like, you're fine, or you're crazy. That's the difference.
Totally. Consent doesn't end. It is through our whole lives, which I think is so sad, because I think so many of us go into marriage and we're like, oh, I guess our bodies are each other's. It's like, no, they're not. So what were some of your processes in overcoming the feeling that it was your fault?
For me, it was at the retreat. I had a very big moment. Like the first moment when I realized it was abuse, I had a moment where I was like, oh my gosh, it wasn't my fault. Just bam. And I can't really explain how I got there other than I guess it must have been something someone else said where I realized, what the heck? I said no. And he continued. Or I was uncomfortable, visibly uncomfortable. And so would say, it's okay. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I didn't ask for these things. Mm-hmm. And then you actually sent me a BYU devotional where he said someone broke into his car and he thought in his mind, well, should I have locked the car? Should I have parked it closer to my house? Like as if it was his fault that someone broke into his car. But no, the person who broke into his car, it was their fault. And the person who abused me and pushed through my obvious discomfort and my obvious saying no, they're the ones that abused me. I did not ask for it. And it was a really freeing feeling. And I know of people, I can think of people coming to my mind right now who haven't gotten that connection yet. And I just wish I could give that to them because it's not your fault. It's not.
Yeah. Even if you didn't say no, even if you didn't expression
say no,
wasn't visible, if there isn't mutual communication, knowing that you're both okay.
Yeah.
That's what a good relationship is. You're constantly checking in. Are you okay? I mean, as we learn with our spouses, we might not have to do that constantly, but especially like in a new relationship, it's like, oh, is this okay? Can we do this? We need to get over the stigma of asking. Like, it's awesome to ask for consent.
Yes, it is.
Instead of giving a kiss or a touch that someone doesn't want, that is way worse than asking and having them say no and feeling a little embarrassed for a minute.
Right. And I'm not saying everybody who doesn't perceive someone else's discomfort is an abuser. They're not. But like in my circumstances, I can look back and know that my discomfort was clear and I was being coerced. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah.
There's a lot of gray lines or blurred lines or whatever you want to say, but yeah.
Yeah. But I think in a healthy relationship, there's communication going on where you can ask each other, or, I mean, I've had things in my dating where something may have happened and later being able to talk and be like, hey, actually, I don't think I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
And if he respects me, then after that, it's like, oh, okay. But if he doesn't, that's not okay. Married, unmarried, whatever it is.
Yep.
For sure. And that's why I feel so passionate about growth, healing work, but just like that, I don't know if it's like mental health has gotten so big now, and we talk about gentle parenting and all these things. And I'm so passionate about teaching my kids consent starts by the age of 2, or 1, like when they know they're their own different person. Consent and boundaries and respect and empathy, like being able to read each other. Like I tell my kids, who someone accidentally bonked his sister and now she's crying. Well, I wasn't trying to. Okay, but look at her. Does she look sad? Does she like that? Just teaching those things. I think, I don't know about other people's families or about other people's circumstances. I feel like I was taught that, but a little bit. And I think we have a lot more access and more information about these things that can help just the next generation and every generation, I guess, heal from whatever's happened to them. And then children to grow up knowing like my body is mine and I don't like that. Please don't treat me like this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. And my baby at like 4 months was always already showing what she was okay with when my kids were mauling her and she's like, "Ma," and I'm like, there she is. She's saying she's not okay with that. So you can't do that.
Yeah.
I think it's so important to talk with our kids about that.
Mm-hmm.
I know we've already talked a little bit about the process that goes on with a partner. Can you think of some things that have been maybe more helpful than others in being able to create a good sex life with your husband?
For me, communication, saying when I'm triggered, when I'm not, what I like, what I don't, but also disclosing to my husband everything was a huge, huge point in our relationship. And I feel like, at least from my experience, because I had been through it and it's painful and it brings up for me a lot of anxiety as we were talking about it. So it was very like, this happened. I don't like this. Let's not do that, And then it wasn't until like a year ago, and I was telling him something so nonchalant, and he was like, "What? I didn't know that happened." And so I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, let's sit down and see what we know about everything." Granted, that might not be okay for everyone in their journey, and it might not be okay. Some partners, it might trigger their own things, But for my marriage, when I disclosed everything, it was like, oh, that makes sense. Oh, now I understand why you don't like this or that or whatever it is. And so it really bonded us in a different way. Like nothing gets you closer than that level of vulnerability.
But I totally agree. I had an exact same moment with Eric where I guess I was feeling triggered at the time or something. And he basically helped me to understand that I had never really told him what happened. I had alluded to it, but the words are just so ugly. You don't want to say them out loud. It's like a dark room that you're opening a door onto and you're shedding light on it. And then the darkness is gone, right? It was kind of like that. As soon as I told him the dirty details, and again, this might not be for everybody. Like I encouraged people to talk earlier, but at the same time, you have to do it when you're ready. I guess I was ready at the time. It was still scary, but as soon as I disclosed specifics, it brought us so much closer. And then recently, this is going to sound so silly, but you just have to do what works for you. And for me, I had to completely reinvent in my mind what sexuality meant to me. Obviously, I can't erase my mind, but I really try to. I try to get rid of what the world says sexuality should be, what has happened to me in the past. I sit there and visualize us being somewhere nice. And so now I'm rewriting this narrative for myself. I think of sex and intimacy for us as if it is something that only he and I do. I'm aware that that's not the case, but it helps me to feel safe. I imagine that it's like we went hiking and we found a trail that had never been used before. And we just like, oh, we like this. This is fun. We feel good doing this. And when I think about it that way, that it's just our own special thing, it has nothing to do with the rest of the world, I feel so much safer. It feels like a fresh start. And I don't know if that would work for anyone else, but it does work for me. And it's been working for me. And it's still something that I'm working on, as I just keep telling myself, this is ours. So I am safe and this is ours. And that helps me a lot.
I love that.
Me too. And when we're talking about communication, I remember one of my previous guests who was a sexual abuse survivor shared that she and her husband used a safe word. And so sometimes like in the moment when you're triggered, especially if your partner might not be as able to recognize it, that they just have a word. You can pick whatever word you want, just like a word that you can say so they know like, oh, okay, we're stopping. Let's see what's going on, take a break. And I thought that was a cool idea, especially if you're still maybe new or it's hard, even if you're not new, but just to have a safe word. I thought that was a cool idea. I think Shannon, you just talked about this, which I loved, but any other thoughts on being able to reclaim your sexuality as something that's beautiful and that's yours? And I loved your idea of like, this is only ours. Like no one else does it.
I think for me, it's been a slow process of that. It's been like, okay, can I like sex? um, can it be enjoyable? Can I have sex without triggers? I think letting go of expectations has been helpful, but also I finally came to this realization a few years ago. It was God created me. My body is good. My whole body is good. And so then it just led to my husband and I, we can connect in multiple ways. And intimacy is one more way to connect deeply. And intimacy looks different every day. You know, sometimes having a really, like, we love talking in the car, like, that is so intimate. That's usually when we have our breakthrough moments and we share all these things. That is so intimate. It's like, you know, my whole heart, you know me in ways that nobody else does. And sex is intimacy, but for me, I had to have that mindset shift that intimacy was more than sex. And intimacy was, like Shannon was saying, me and my person. It's just me and Brett. And we get to decide how we are intimate and what that looks like. And the healing work has helped, but the journey has been worth it. Trying to figure out each other and how we tick. And it has been more than just like, oh, I'm healing my trauma, but just like, oh, I'm healing my heart and I'm getting to know someone at such a different level, if that makes sense.
Totally. It just being able to take emotional risks and really see, I love the idea of to know and be known. That's what creates intimacy, and our sexuality and sexual expression is a beautiful part of that. But what actually makes sex good is the emotional risks and the emotional connection that happens before and during and after.
Yep.
Yeah, just we, thanks to your podcast, have been trying new things in and out of the bedroom, you know, and that in a large way has helped me feel like I'm reclaiming my sexuality in our relationship. It has sort of felt like it's been taken and a part of it has belonged in this past place. But just the more things we build on together, the farther those things kind of get. And the more I feel like I'm healing. I didn't realize, and this is a struggle we've had in our marriage, how important intimacy is to him, because for me, it's been this struggle. But now that we're trying to build it together, it's helping me heal from my traumas. And so, yeah, being like flirting throughout the day, texting each other, touching each other non-sexually throughout the day, just these tiny little building blocks are what's helping me reclaim this wonderful thing for me and him.
That's awesome. We're about out of time. As we're closing up, I just would love for you guys to share, especially for those women who maybe haven't had the courage to open up, because it's hard. It takes a lot of courage. What are some tips or things that you would share with them to recognize that it was abuse, it's not okay, and to be able to find a safe place to share it?
I would encourage anybody who thinks they may have been abused, check out the Unique Foundation, YOUNIQUE. So Unique. They have really wonderful resources. I feel like it could be a good place to start, because for some people, it might be easier to talk to somebody that they don't know personally. Even if you don't go to the retreat, they have resources. And I think if you feel an opportunity come, don't let it pass. The opportunities kind of present themselves, because what's the statistic? 1 in 5 women?
I think it's 1 in 3.
1 in 3?
Yeah.
Wow, that's worse.
Yeah.
I just feel like you will come across somebody who might be willing to talk about their abuse, and they are a good person to talk to, probably, most likely, because they will understand and they're not going to judge you. And just start there. If you know somebody already, or go online, like, I don't know. It was just such a slow process for me, but I think it was hearing other people's stories that made me connect and get the courage to say, you could give someone my email even, you know what I mean? Because I'd be willing to help people with that. It's just something inside you will tell you, oh my gosh, you'll start to shake. You'll get so anxious, like, oh my gosh, this sounds familiar. That's me. You're right. It's you. Now's your chance.
Yeah, that's perfect. I would just say to anyone who has been through it, who's a survivor, or who thinks they have, that it wasn't your fault and you are worthy and you are still whole, even though
yes,
the unfathomable happened to you, and that there is healing and there is hope and there is light at the end of the tunnel. And it's work and it takes time, but it's worth it. It's worth it to reclaim who you truly are and reclaim your sexuality, your individuality, because trauma makes us want to hide away and to keep everything closed up in our little Pandora's box. But we are more than our experiences, and we are more than what's happened to us. And we are just beings of light, and we are meant to shine. And sadly, life happens and hard things happen, and sometimes they're beyond our control, but we have the power to choose better and to keep taking the next right step, the next little step that's going to lead us to the woman or the man that we are meant to be. So
Awesome.
I agree 100%. I couldn't have said it better.
Thank you both so much. This has been awesome. Thanks for being a change for good to help women be able to share their stories. Thank you both for being brave to come on and share some of yours. It's been awesome.
Thank you, Ariel.
yeah, thank you so much for having us. This is an honor.
Thanks so much for sticking with me on such a vulnerable and hard topic, but I think one that needs to be talked about more often. I really appreciated so much of what Leticia and Shannon shared about connecting with their spouses and sharing their past, including their traumas. And I think that that's a powerful lesson for all of us, whether or not we have experienced abuse or assault, but truly letting our partner see us and know us, even the dark parts. I loved how Shannon talked about being able to shine a light on those dark parts. That is what has been able to truly create intimacy in my life, is to be able to let Kyle see all the things, the dark and the light, and to be vulnerable to share. And when there's compassion and love and sharing, that's where I think true, beautiful intimacy is created, and what allows an awesome sex life that can still be fun and impulsive, but also that's something so much deeper. Thanks so much for learning with me on this journey. And as always, thanks for talking love. Thank you to all of you who listen and join me on this journey, and to our Ladies Talking Love team who make the podcast possible. Thanks to our sound wizard, Kimberly Demers, our newsletter guru, Lauren Barton, and our miscellaneous task whiz, Jana Norman. As always, thanks for talking love.